Hey Wellness Warriors, welcome to the Wellness Revolution. I'm your host, Dr. Milan Riove, and in today's episode, we're talking about the hidden links between burnout and autoimmune conditions that you need to know and what you can do about them. So 50 million Americans are suffering from autoimmune conditions, and almost 80% of them are women. And that's an alarming figure, regardless of the gender that's being most affected. So considering there are only about 350 million people in the country, to have 50 million of them suffering from an autoimmune condition is, in my opinion, an epidemic. We often focus on inflammation as a cause of autoimmune condition, but the reality is that inflammation is the result of the autoimmune condition. Inflammation isn't really a cause of anything. Inflammation results from a metabolism that isn't optimally functioning, very often due to the originator of metabolism, which is the gastrointestinal system. That's where it all begins and ends. And when that system is not functioning properly, that leads to inflammation. And then that inflammation coexists with an autoimmune condition depending on other factors. So the idea that the inflammation is what caused the autoimmune condition leads us down a slippery slope that results in autoimmune conditions persisting and not really having a solution. So people end up on medications that often further damage their immune systems in order to try to control the symptoms of their autoimmune condition, not realizing that the issue isn't the inflammation at all, but what caused the inflammation itself. And so we're going to take a deep dive today into what those factors are and how you can protect yourself from getting an autoimmune condition as, unfortunately, it becomes increasingly more common. And if you have an autoimmune condition, what are some steps that you can take now that can help you start to reverse those common causes? So what do we know about burnout and autoimmune conditions? So we know that chronic stress increases the risk of autoimmune diseases by up to 36%. We know that stress produces the inflammation that coexists with the autoimmune condition. How does stress do this? By suppressing the gastrointestinal system and also through the activation of the stress hormones themselves. While cortisol, the chronic stress hormone, helps to control inflammation and actually helps to reduce inflammation, when that hormone is relied upon for too long, when stress becomes chronic, things start to backfire. We talked more specifically about this in our last episode. So another factor that drives autoimmune conditions is poor sleep. And that is one of the 4 pillars of wellness that I always talk about. Sleep is super important because this is when the body is restored. This is when, again, the inflammation that coexists with the autoimmune disorders is removed from the body. And if we're not sleeping enough, or if we're having interrupted sleep, that obviously will put a monkey wrench into getting rid of the root causes of the autoimmune condition. So in the holistic world, we understand autoimmune conditions as not an overactivity of the immune system, but in fact a weakness. And so this is a common misconception or myth that is propagated, that the reason that you have an autoimmune condition is because your body is overreacting to tissues or overproducing antibodies. And again, while this is an effect of an autoimmune condition, it's not the actual cause of it. So producing antibodies is the result of a confused immune system. And the reason that the immune system gets confused at all is because it's weak, is because it's missing things, or things are in its way that are preventing it from functioning properly. And so, as a lot of you may have heard me say before, the immune system has just one function in your body. There's just one thing that it needs to do, and that is to recognize what is you from what is not you. And what is not you gets to be destroyed and eliminated, and what is you gets to stay. And that's really the only function of the immune system. Now, obviously, it does it in thousands of different ways. We are barely scratching the surface to even understand how the immune system actually functions, within the depths of itself. There are so many different immune cells that are activated. There are so many, chemicals that we call cytokines and other inflammatory markers that are produced by the immune system. as if it's this very complex orchestra where, every instrument is playing its role and seamlessly producing the music that we hear, within the body. That's a perfectly operating immune system, right? And if a couple instruments are out of tune or producing the wrong notes, then the music sounds dissonant, right? It sounds off, it sounds wrong. So the same thing can happen in the immune system if all of the components are not functioning in synchronicity with each other. Why does this happen, right? It happens for a few different reasons. So again, it can be caused by deficiencies, the immune system not having enough of what it needs. And that can often occur through poor diet, or if you're not absorbing your food, right? So what you feed your immune system is critical, right? So the immune system is immediately impacted by what we eat, right? So every time we eat something, the immune system is activated to make sure, hey, is that okay? Can that come in? Or are there toxins in here? Are there bacteria, viruses, parasites in here that I need to be aware of? So immediately your immune system goes to work. And if it's confused, or if it's weakened, or if it's suppressed, right? So chronic stress suppresses the immune system. So even without having any vitamin deficiencies or malabsorption or any of those other factors, just having stress that goes on for too long suppresses the immune system. And that alone is a problem, right? So when the immune system is suppressed, that means when you eat that food and it has bacteria on it or viruses or toxins on it, the immune system may not be firing on all cylinders because it's suppressed, and certain things will end up in the gastrointestinal system that don't belong there, right? So this is the first flaw, where the immune system gets confused because it's suppressed. Or maybe it's not confused, but it can't respond because it's kind of turned down. So it's kind of like you're trying to cook something on the stove, but you don't have the flame up high enough. You don't have the burner up high enough, and you're wondering why the food isn't cooking, right? That's the same thing that happens when your immune system is suppressed by stress. So now you don't have those factors that are active and vigilantly scanning and surveilling for invaders, things that are not yourself. And this is a very easy way for toxins to get into the gut, for bacteria, parasites, viruses to find their way into your gastrointestinal system. And the reason this is an issue is because your gastrointestinal system is more than just a tube that digests and absorbs your food. There's so much more going on down there that we just started scratching the surface to find out about maybe about 20 years ago. Now, again, in traditional Chinese medicine, they've had a ton to say about this for over 4,000 years, and they've been right the entire time. So in traditional Chinese medicine, we understand that inflammation, or what they call damp, is actually controlled within what they call spleen. Spleen is an energy field, or they call them organs in Chinese medicine, but they're not physical organ structures like we would understand in our mainstream model. So when in Chinese medicine we say spleen, we're talking about an energy field that has a lot of different functions. One of them is to transform water. The transformation of water can be somewhat roughly equivalent to managing inflammation, because inflammation is mostly water. It may contain toxins and other markers within it, but vast majority of what we would call inflammation is water. It might get murky and dirty, so to speak, which makes it toxic type of water, but it's still water. So in traditional Chinese medicine, we call that damp. Damp can become hot, it can become cold, it can be of a neutral temperature, and it can congeal into what's called phlegm, according to traditional Chinese medicine. These are just different kind of categories of inflammation that we might find in our allopathic model. And when that inflammation stays in the system for too long, it can obstruct the flow of energy, it can obstruct the flow of blood. And that can really wreak havoc on the body in general. And that can place one at risk for autoimmune conditions, whereby the immune system gets so confused that now it's not able to recognize itself from not itself. It can't distinguish from the parasite that doesn't belong in you versus your own thyroid tissue, or your own connective tissue, for example, or your nerves or muscles. And so it begins to recognize them as foreign, and it triggers an immune response against them. It's not an overactive immune response, it's just an immune response, right? Just like it would trigger an immune response for a parasite or a bacteria that didn't belong in the body. So it's not necessarily that it's an overactivity, it's that it's confused. And until it stops being confused, it will continue to produce those antibodies, continue to promote that inflammation around those tissues that it's attacking. And this is what we eventually recognize as an autoimmune condition. So back to the spleen in traditional Chinese medicine. They had contributed many functions of spleen to what we're now attributing to the microbiome and to the immune system that actually lives within the gastrointestinal system. So when we want to equate what the Chinese call spleen to what we would understand in a mainstream model, there's no apples to apples comparison. Like, we can't say, oh, they're talking about specifically these organs. Because what they're saying is so holistic and so almost ethereal. It's almost like in the quantum physics realm, if you will. You can't quite see it, smell it, touch it, but it's there. And the closest thing we can say is that they're talking about metabolism. All the different processes in the human body that would equate to metabolism is somewhat what they're talking about when they talk about spleen qi. So the gastrointestinal system would be part of that because it's responsible for creating your metabolism. And again, metabolism is simply how you make and use your energy out of food and oxygen so that you can power your body's functions. And so the sum total of all of that making energy and then using it to power your body function through the burning of calories is metabolism, essentially. And so when we're talking about spleen, we're talking more or less about that. And so they understood thousands of years ago how these mechanisms evolved. So the microbiome is where most of the genes that we actually use live. They're located within the large intestine. So the microbiome is made up of 100 to 200 trillion different bacteria that make up species that then make up what we call phyla within the microbiome. Phyla are kind of like clans, they're groups of families of bacteria. Inside of those bacteria, when we add up all the different genes that they contain 3.4 million genes. That's a lot of genes when we compare that to how many genes we have inside of our own cells. So the human body only has 25,000 genes within its own cells. And the microbiome that live within us and on us, on our skin, in our mucous membranes, and in the gastrointestinal system, they contain 3.4 million genes. Like, that's a huge difference. So the microbiome is critical for our body function because we literally use those genes to adapt and flow and be flexible within ourselves so that we can handle stress, we can manage stress, we can find alternate ways of getting things done if the preferred pathways of our bodies are blocked or obstructed by not having enough vitamins and minerals, or when things just go wrong, if we're not absorbing properly, if we have chronic stress. We have to adapt and use a lot of these genes within the microbiome to find alternate routes to get our work done, to get our body functions still done. Now, obviously that's less efficient, right? When you have to go through 30 different side roads to get somewhere that's only a mile away, you might drive 10 miles to get a mile away from where you started. That's going to be very inefficient, right? You're going to burn more fuel. You're going to have to change your tires more often. You have to change your oil more often if this becomes a habit, right? This is what chronic stress does to our bodies. We have to adapt and use all these alternate paths, and that becomes inefficient, right? So the body is being stretched beyond where it would want to go. It's being asked to do much more work than it would normally do. That consumes the body's resources, and it makes it weaker and weaker over time. That can also allow toxins to build up. It can allow more and more inflammation to build up. And then we can easily see how that creates this slippery slope, right? We're getting weaker and weaker. Our immune system is then getting weaker and weaker. More and more toxins are allowed to come in because there's nobody surveilling to keep them out. And so these toxins can come in many forms. They can come in the form of pesticides on our food, plastics, antibiotics. They can come in the form of heavy metals. We're seeing a lot of heavy metals now. I've had 3 clients in a row with tungsten toxicity, which a decade ago we didn't see very much of, right? So, leading us to think, like, is this coming in from like the computer industry? Like, what's happening? Where's all this tungsten coming from? Tungsten's something you might find, golf clubs are made of tungsten, fishing weights are made of tungsten, darts are made of tungsten, and so we can see how the factories that make these products can then spew the byproducts of making those products into the atmosphere, polluting the soil, the water, and the air, and that can easily come into the body, especially again if your immune system is either suppressed from stress or weakened from stress. And so now that ends up in your gastrointestinal system, right? Your biggest metabolic engine. And that disturbs the microbiome directly, right? They're very sensitive. So the microbiome is just exposed. It's not really like protected and defended very well. And so toxins coming in can easily kill off the good bacteria, although not all of them are wiped out, right? We're beginning to see that it's not a matter of a complete and total wipeout. Like, there will be certain species of certain phyla, or certain families that are, diminished while others stay normal. And so we get this kind of mixed bag of the microbiome, but the end result is it's not functioning as well, right? We see a lot of metabolic dysfunction of the microbiome itself. So the bacteria also have a metabolism, right? So we have a metabolism, the bacteria have a metabolism, and when their metabolism is disturbed, ours is automatically disturbed, right? Because we rely on them so heavily. 90% of the genes that we use are the microbiome's genes. So we're borrowing their genes to function and to be alive. And so when they're disturbed, we're disturbed. The other thing that's further disturbed, and again, this creates this vicious circle, is the microbiome actually stabilizes the immune cells that live in the gastrointestinal system. So almost approximately 80% of the immune cells in the body actually live in the large intestine with the microbiome. So if the microbiome is disturbed, the immune system is disturbed. If the immune system is disturbed, the microbiome is disturbed. So they're what we call symbiotic, like they rely on each other, and then we rely on them, right? So again, we can see like this, how this dumpster fire can happen just from the gastrointestinal system being disturbed, and then all of a sudden we can see how that would lead us down a slippery slope to burnout, and beyond burnout, an autoimmune condition, right? Now again, we don't talk about burnout as a metabolic condition, but we need to, because it is one. So the idea that it's just, again, this workplace phenomenon that happens when you go to work and then when you leave work, it's not there, it's not true, right? It's not a workplace phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that we take with us wherever we are. So when we're at work, it might get exacerbated, right? Because we spend a lot of time at work, right? Or we're in work mode even when we work at home. And so we spend a lot of time in that mode. And so if we're already in a burnout state, it's easy to see how it could be magnified in an environment like that. But that, again, it doesn't mean that that's where it starts and ends, right? It starts and ends within us. And so if we want to reduce the risk of autoimmune conditions or reverse, the risk factors that caused one, we have to really look at burnout as one of the main factors. And we have to look at how that individual got into the burnout state to get themselves out of the burnout state, right? And making sure that the gastrointestinal system is firing on all cylinders is extremely important. And there's a lot that can go wrong in there, as we just talked about. So what are some signs that people can exhibit when they're kind of on that slippery slope that makes them suspicious that maybe they're in burnout, or even worse, having an autoimmune condition? So brain fog is a huge one. Fatigue is another. Muscle weakness is another. Dizziness can be one as well. Attention deficits, so like if you're suspecting that you have ADHD, it's very likely you have burnout. Sleep disturbances and muscle aches, joint pains. Those are huge symptoms of potential autoimmune conditions or burnout conditions. And so brain fog is a huge one, right? Whatever goes on in your gut goes on in your brain, right? Because the gut is the second brain. So if it's foggy in your brain, that means it's foggy in your gut, right? Something's going on in there that is triggering something going on in here. Now, brain fog can be due to a few different things. Again, often leading back to the gastrointestinal system. So either the quality of the food that you're eating isn't great, right? So if you're eating a lot of processed food, eating out a lot, or skipping meals, right? That's another big one, like not eating enough. That's a big one that I see. Then that's one huge place to begin, right? And so if you know your dynamic metabolic type, that helps you to fix pillar number one, right? If you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, you need more food, always very clean, high protein, very high quality leafy veggies, bright colored veggies, and then some carbs. Carbs are important. They may not be as important later in the day, like when you're winding down, but they are important early in the day because we need to fuel the most important part of the day, which is when we're the busiest, right? So if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, again, you need to eat actually more. Now, some people need to eat less, right? So someone who has an excess dynamic metabolic type, where again, the excess is more of the inflammation. They have a ton of inflammation and they have toxins, any of the categories we just talked about. Now, those people can benefit from fasting and eating less, right? So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and knowing your dynamic metabolic type is a huge part of that. And then if you know if you're hot, cold, or temperature neutral, excess, or deficient, right? There are 6 dynamic metabolic types. Then you know exactly how to deal with pillar number 1, the eat pillar. And then the next pillar, it's a 4-pillar solution. So it's eat, and then it's move. Movement is really important to help, again, rid the body of toxins. So how much to move, what kind of activity to do, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It depends on your dynamic metabolic type. So if you have an excess dynamic metabolic type, you need more aggressive exercises. You need to move a lot more because you need to kind of get those toxins and that inflammation unstuck and removed from the body. Now, again, if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, you don't want to do that because you're going to make yourself actually worse, and you're going to allow more and more toxins to build up, and you're going to get more and more burnt out. And so if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, it's important to actually be restorative. So you still want to move. It's not that you want to be sedentary, but the way that you move matters. So if you're already in a deficient dynamic metabolic type state, you don't want to over move yourself because you're just going to dig yourself into a deeper and deeper hole, right? The dumpster is just going to get deeper and deeper, still on fire, right? So for those people, they need to be more restorative. So yin yoga, tai chi, qigong, breath work, again, really essential for people in deficient dynamic metabolic type to start to reverse those root causes that are placing you at risk for an autoimmune condition, as well as to get yourself out of a burnout state, because you can't do one without the other, right? If you have to get yourself out of burnout to get the root causes of the autoimmune condition corrected. So whatever is causing the burnout is also what's causing the autoimmune condition. It's just movement along a spectrum. And so it's really important to know, all right, what type of movement do I need to be doing that best suits my dynamic metabolic type? And then sleep. Again, we understand based on studies, like sleep drives burnout, drives autoimmune conditions. So how much sleep do I need depends, again, on your dynamic metabolic type and your gender, your biological gender. And so, women need an hour more than men because of our menstruation. We tend to be what's called blood deficient. Again, this leads us down the slippery slope of burnout more than men. Like, we have more risk factors, unfortunately, because of our makeup, right? The fact that we menstruate every month and we rely on our blood so much as the nurturers, so to speak. We're the ones who menstruate, we're the ones who get pregnant, we're the ones who breastfeed, right? And we work on top of that, right? And so we make blood when we sleep. So if we're losing blood, and if a lot of our body functions rely on blood, and we're not getting enough sleep and not making enough blood, that makes things worse, right? So we need that extra sleep as biological females. But how much sleep you need specifically depends on your dynamic metabolic type. And Obviously, people with an excess dynamic metabolic type need less sleep than someone with a deficient dynamic metabolic type. But it's really important to know. And then detoxification, right? We had a whole podcast on that. I think it was the podcast before last. So again, you can look at our playlists and you can watch the one on detoxification to give you much more specifics. But again, how you detox, how you remove toxins from your body matters, so that you don't actually make yourself worse, drive yourself more into a burnout state, which increases your risk of an autoimmune condition. Or if you have an autoimmune condition, again, looking at the root causes of burnout will help to treat the root causes of the autoimmune condition, so that you could reduce your dependency on the medications that control the symptoms. Again, controlling the symptoms doesn't eliminate the damage that gets done. So again, we often use specific medications for autoimmune conditions to reduce what we think are the symptoms of the autoimmune condition. But because we're not treating the root, other things are going on. So the root causes are still there. And so it comes out sideways, right? It comes out as another autoimmune condition, or God forbid, cancer, diabetes, any number of other metabolic conditions, because the root cause of it is metabolic. And so blocking the expression of a symptom by further suppressing the immune system is not the solution, right? Because the more you suppress the immune system, the more you're going to destroy someone's metabolism, the more they're going to be at risk for other things. And so, not again that you should stop your medications, it's not that. It's that we want to render them obsolete. We want to do our best to work on those root causes, so that you may not require that medication anymore down the road, right? So we never recommend people stop their medications, but we do recommend that they look at those root causes, get them situated, so that maybe a year down the road or so, you're feeling much better, your markers are much better, and you can start to wean down and off medications under the guidance of a prescribing physician, of course, and hopefully not require them anymore. And so, of course, the prevention of autoimmune conditions is extremely important as well, because it's again, it is a dumpster fire. We're seeing more and more and more autoimmune conditions. There are over 80 different kinds, and with the smorgasbord of toxins that are being released into the atmosphere, and the assortment of plastics that we're exposed to, and all the other things that create toxicity within our bodies, if we don't work on the body itself to make it much more robust, much stronger, so that it can withstand that storm, we're going to just keep getting worse and worse and worse over time. And so again, removing the toxins from your environment, eating clean, making sure you are tested for heavy metals, right? It's a urine test that's the gold standard, to look for heavy metal toxicity, to make sure that you're not being continuously exposed to these things, and to find a method that will safely remove them is extremely important. Looking at the gastrointestinal system, considering getting what's called a functional stool analysis to see, what does my microbiome look like? What are they up to in there? How's their metabolism? Are they functioning? What's going on, right? Another really quick thing I wanted to touch on are probiotics. There's a lot of confusion around probiotics, and now that we can actually test the microbiome using DNA analysis, what we're concluding is that probiotics are almost never indicated. The reason being, we used to think that the microbiome was just completely wiped out by antibiotics. Now we're realizing that no, that's not the case. The antibiotics might wipe out certain species or certain individual bacteria, but it doesn't wipe out the entire microbiome. And so when you're taking probiotics, and again, probiotics are the actual bacteria themselves. When you're taking large amounts of bacteria in capsule form, in powder form, that are like in doses of say like 10 billion or more colony forming units, or CFUs, you're dumping a bunch of bacteria into your gastrointestinal system. We're finding out the hard way that that's not a good idea, because what that presents is we're artificially increasing certain species well beyond their normal limits, so that we can increase the ones that are low. And that creates a whole other imbalance in a whole other direction that still destabilizes the immune system and causes all kinds of problems. And so I find myself, now that I'm testing, I almost never prescribe probiotics anymore. And the The better way, the better solution that we're finding is prebiotics. So prebiotics are food. It's basically things that the good bacteria eats, like fertilizer for them. And we're realizing that they're a lot smarter than we are. And so they can figure themselves out if we just stop dumping on them and we just leave them alone and give them some food that they can eat. They will then sort themselves through and they will rebalance themselves without us artificially creating those numbers with probiotics. Prebiotics are really important. There are many different foods that are prebiotic by nature, but some of them are green plantains and green bananas. Like, they can't be ripe. As soon as they're ripe, they're no longer prebiotic. And so you can treat them kind of like a root vegetable. You can boil them like you would a potato, for example. Or you can also fry them. Green plantains are delicious when they're fried. That's not quite as healthy, but it's still considered a prebiotic technically, as long as you're not doing it a lot. And also oatmeal. Oatmeal is a prebiotic, as well as white potatoes that are cooked and then cooled, and then white rice that is cooked and then cooled. These feed the good bacteria, and it's like fertilizer. You just put fertilizer on the plant and it just knows what to do, right? You don't have to sit there and artificially intervene to make leaves grow and try and do things. You just know, I feed the plant, I give it water, and I call it a day, right? As long as it's by the sun, it'll be fine. It's the same thing in the microbiome. As long as we feed them and leave them alone, they will be fine. And so this does not include like yogurt, kombucha, kimchi. Like, the amounts of good bacteria or probiotics in those foods are low, so we're not going to disturb the microbiome doing that. I'm talking specifically about when we're dumping like tens of billions, hundreds of billions of bacteria in with supplements. So if you've been struggling with any of the symptoms that we talked about that are stress related, or if you suspect you're in a burnout state, or if you know you're in a burnout state, or if you've been suspecting that you have an autoimmune condition but your blood is normal, or even if you've been diagnosed, I encourage you to take action now. Visit our website, awakenedwellnessnow.com, and take our burnout assessment today so you can know your dynamic metabolic type and how to do your 4-pillar fix so that you can start to really work on those root causes that are leading you down that slippery slope, because you deserve to feel better, right? You deserve to have vibrant health, vitality, energy, and just to be happy, right? And that comes when metabolism is running on all cylinders, right? We've got our 4 pillars up and running, and we know exactly what to do throughout the day to make sure that we stay healthy. And so I hope that you've enjoyed today's podcast and have gotten a lot out of it. Again, I encourage you to visit our website to learn more, awakenedwellnessnow.com. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. I'm sure that you have friends and family who might greatly benefit from what we talked about today. And don't forget, we have our corporate burnout resolution solutions. If you're interested in taking our corporate